and there's often this sense of like, oh my gosh, like this is a disaster and they've missed this much time and how are we going to get them back on track?
Right.
And it's
Yeah.
like there is that's not actually a thing. Education is cylindrical. So, you introduce a concept in grade 1, you revisit it in grade 3 or grade 4, you revisit it, like it's very much built upon itself. So, this idea that hours lost in a classroom for a week, a month, 6 months is like, oh, all is lost, the child is never going to graduate and get a job, isn't really realistic. And I can say that because a lot of our students, especially the ones who are struggling in school because they have a learning disability or struggling because they have, an emotional dysregulation disorder or whatever the case may be, most students come to us having missed large chunks of their schooling because being in the classroom was too difficult. And there's often this sense of like, oh my gosh, like this is a disaster and they've missed this much time and how are we going to get them back on track? And it's like, there is that's not actually a thing. Like you can figure out where a child is at academically and you can catch them up.
Yeah.
The problem with a classroom, I think, is, and this is, where we're locked into thinking, is that a classroom keeps moving forward and they don't stop and pause and like make sure that everybody's with them. They just keep kind of moving forward like a freight train.
Yeah.
To a degree.
Yeah. They kind of. What do you think? Because they kind of have to.
They kind of have to.
Especially grade 11 and 12, right? Where, there's pressure from, the parents and the teachers have goals that they need to meet for the rest of the class. Yeah. Like, what do you? Yeah. What do you do about that?
Yeah, that is the tricky part. So for us, it's like, because it's more individual and we're like looking at each student as a specific, individual, we're able to really figure out, like if a kid is struggling, we're not just going to let them struggle. We're going to try and figure out like where and why. Like if they're struggling in math, well, what parts of math are they struggling with? Because then we can pause and, support that piece so that they can then move forward successfully, rather than what happens in a classroom often is that like it just keeps moving.
Right.
And then they're just like they're in the dust, right?
So do you guys have a typical, like, are you guys September to June? Because, if something, a student gets behind or whatnot, how does that, like, what does that timeline look like if everyone needs to go in June?
Well, so for us, we have a 2-week time frame that we look at. So if a student is falling behind and they're like not submitting assignments in they're 2 weeks behind, let's say, then we go like, oh, something's up.
Gotcha. Okay. The
flags go up. Like that's our first flag.
Right.
And then we have a pretty robust school-based team that meets on a bi-weekly basis. So if for some reason a student, especially a new student or even an existing student who might have been trucking along kind of like normal, and then suddenly there's a blip and we're like, oh, we're not getting assignments, like what could be going on? And then that conversation starts, right? So that we don't let it become this thing that then is so big
you
that
don't
we
let
can't.
snowball.